Kate Mila-Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen, and it's time for our Saturday book. We are continuing our exploration of the Eden Enigma by Paul Wallis. This would be video number 3. So last Saturday we did the first 2 parts. Paul Wallis, as you should know, is the author of a whole series of books based on the Eden series. There's a playlist here on my channel if you're interested. I have to find my glasses here for a second. Okay, this writing is so small. Writing seems to be getting smaller and smaller all the time. Paul Wallis researches the world's ancestral narratives for their insight into human origins, human potential, and our place in the cosmos. His YouTube documentaries on the Fifth Kind TV, and the Paul Wallis channel are watched by millions. He's married with 3 children and lives in Australia. And he very kindly came and talked with us after we covered his last book, The Eden Conspiracy, I think it was. I've done so many of them now, I can't keep track. He just won't slow down with the writing. And the good news is that I've been in touch with him, and he's going to come back and talk about this book with us soon. He's out digging around in ruins somewhere, so when he returns, we'll schedule that. Please stay tuned because he's a wonderful guest, and it'll be so much fun to have another chat with him. In the meantime, what are we talking about here? We're talking about ancient evidence globally that seems to be in concert with each other. The potentials of human origin having to do with paleocontact. Fancy words for the theory that is becoming more and more likely when we really interpret the symbology in archaeological finds, that humankind may have had a little help from our cosmic friends. So this is the book. This is video number 3. We're on chapter 6. Let's get started. So Paul points out the similarities between, I can never say this word, Urartian. We'll have to get him to pronounce it 3 times quickly. Urartian battle helmets and those of the guerrilla military police in Planet of the Apes. I have not seen the new one, so I had to look this up, and I did see the similarity, and I will be posting it on my, what's it called, community posts on my YouTube channel. And he says this is a perfect example of the power of symbology. This ancient helmets, I believe they were Hittite and Urartian, same types of helmets, and then you get them coming back in a Hollywood movie. He said the shape is powerful. It strikes fear. It's a message. It gets to the heart of the enemy. He discusses the mythological links across cultures and reminds us that in the 1200s, a guy called, and this is a funny name, Snorri Sturluson, and it's not S-N-O-R-E-Y, somebody who snores a lot. It's actually a Scandinavian name. And this man was famous for writing down the Viking sagas. He argued that not all of the Viking sagas were fables. Sturluson, and this is in the 1200s, he said, some of these are true. They really happened. These are the stories of conquests. You may think Odin was imaginary, but Odin's stories are based on real events. And he also made the connection between Scandinavian and Armenian, ancient Armenian areas. The Scandinavian languages and Armenia have similar roots. So Paul Wallis is amongst many other things, a linguist. And one of the fascinating things for me about his books is that he often takes the time to parse into the words to find those linguistic links. Sometimes it's a little hard to synopsize that. You need the chart in front of you. And, me saying re, ara, aru 50 million times is not very entertaining. I really recommend that you get these books and read them, because there's way more to them than what I'm able to synopsize here. This is just summary. Odin was said to come from a place called Asaland, which is a region of Armenia that includes Van. Now, if you've watched the first two videos, Van is this place, Turkey, ancient Armenia, where they are doing archaeological investigating, he and his friend Matt. So he says they're sitting having a beer with friends, and he asks, didn't the Sumerians invent beer? And it has been traced to 13,000 years ago in parts of Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, in a time prior to the last ice age. So the history of beer is older than the history of agriculture, which I suppose, if you think about it, makes sense, because it would be easier to let something sit and ferment unwittingly and then after the fact realize, hey, let's do that again, than it would be to be doing botany and horticulture. That takes a little bit more know-how. But the earliest recipe for beer is found on Sumerian clay tablets in cuneiform writing from the 6th century BC, which is before the Common Era, before Christ, you know, the early form of measuring. The Epic of Gilgamesh says sky people introduced beer to humans. And he points out, Paul does, that intoxicant drinks are the means of adopting cognitive powers. You will often see mind-altering beverages involved in shamanic and religious ritual. The most obvious example of that is in the Christian church, wine at the communion. Then there's ayahuasca. There's a long tradition of ingesting some form of naturally occurring chemical or human-made drink that will elevate your consciousness and achieve whatever it is the shamanic ritual is that you're involved in. So there's he cites different places that, you know, that have this similarity. The Mayan stories credit fermented drinks in helping humans make the great cognitive leap forward. And still today, as I mentioned, it's done in shamanic practices. You know, what ayahuasca was the big fad there for a while. I don't know if it still is, but psychoactive teas are used by some cultures to achieve an altered state of consciousness. This all dates back very far. The Egyptians used mandrake and henbane, which were hallucinogenics, to achieve some sort of contact experience in relationship to their mystical rituals, their religion. In the 1st century BC, the Greek, I always say this wrong, Eleusinian rituals, they had a tea ceremony that was a fungal tea that was called kikion. I hope I pronounced that. And they used it to, they actually can tell now, it was used to modulate brain waves to trigger certain hormones, to communicate with interdimensional guides, or to increase insight, or both. Plato writes about doing it. Socrates was involved in it. And because of the rules and regulations of YouTube, I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating any kind of mind-altering substances. I'm merely describing the opinions of people who have studied this. And we're speaking now about Terence McKenna, who was an ethnobiologist, and he studied this quite a bit. And in the 90s, he said that humans achieve new consciousness and intelligence, this is his theory, through accidental exposure to psychoactive foods. It was basically luck. We stumbled on things that made people go, whoa, expanding their understanding of whatever. And it increased our ability to imagine and to think, and we repeated it. So this is the research of this ethnobiologist. Recent University of California studies indicate that psychoactive substances may reflect a richer and deeper state of consciousness, that they're not creating it, they're opening it up to understanding. So Paul Wallis says he has not yet found evidence of substances being used at Hyannis, which is this temple fort that they're exploring. But there are signs of chalices being involved in their rituals. And, where you find a cup, you usually find a liquid, you usually find some substance in it. So he's extrapolating. The Mesopotamian area at the time had a long tradition of magical potions and infusions. And so the influence of just other belief systems in the region would be present. The Brahmins in Asia, the Zoroastrians in Persia, they both used a thing called soma haoma, some sort of psychoactive juices. The Egyptians had the female goddess Hathor, the deity associated with a magical brew, and also with humans developing agriculture. This brew that she was involved with as the goddess altered your state of mind and increased your communication with other dimensions. So we're talking about now, Paul, all of this is by way of talking about these archaeological discoveries in Turkey, in the area of ancient Armenia, in a place called Van, at a temple fortress ruin called Hyannis. And he says this area is surrounded by cultures that share practices that are mystical and are associated with shamanic priest-like ritual that involve mystical drinks and contact with other beings. We know the followers of Haldi, and we know this because of what we've already read, the followers of Haldi sought a renewed contact with the Dinger. Now, I hope I'm saying that right. The Dinger are like the Anunnaki or the Elohim. These are the advanced beings who came and stayed and helped humans to evolve. In many cultures, and I should correct that a little bit. Re-evolve. It's more that we were the beings that we were, but we had lost the culture that we had. We'd lost the civilization that we had as a result of catastrophic earth events, whatever they may have been. In Genesis, it's the flood. You start the book of Genesis in the immediate aftermath of a giant flood, and the waters have to be separated, and the skies have to be cleared of smoke and salt and clear water separated, and so it goes. And then there's the second flood with Noah. Most cultures have stories like this. And what happens after the catastrophe is that people are almost at an existential moment and brought back from the brink of extinction with the help of these more advanced beings. This is the premise. In many cultures, for example, Mayans, Judaism, contact with higher being gods, if you want to call it, of the past, was essential to maintaining the authority of kings and priests and prophets. So they associated themselves with these higher beings and took the reins of power from them. The rights of kings, the divine rights of kings, is what we're getting at here. There is the understanding that these human elites ruled on behalf of the gods or the other beings. So temple ritual and ruling power were always associated. I mean, every time you see some big hoo-ha going on in England, they go into the cathedral. Right? The main temple becomes a royal place as well. Remote higher communication is considered possible, passed down to the emissaries of those beings, and they are given the wisdom to govern. They keep in touch, you know. This is the divine right of kings, the royal authority over people handed down. There's often a direct link between the stories of the gods associated with a beam of light and sacred places built to capture and magnify light. And this would strike awe. He reminds us, so we're talking about a period of time before, you know, electricity. This kind of ability to light up a room, you know, would have created awe in people. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. Paul appreciates the opportunity to socialize over beers here. This is all part of a larger conversation. And others about this, because he says he lost friends since he began to talk about paleocontact. It's taboo. It's almost completely taboo to talk about other life in the universe, possible contact in the past or the present. And he's enjoying the fellowship of people who are willing to entertain these notions. He said his past 33 years were spent in extended intentional community. He was an Anglican priest, a deacon in the Anglican Church. Kind of a big shot, you know, kind of up there in the hierarchy. And all that implies, you know, you have this broad community of people within your religious community. And then you have the people of your church, your congregants that you deal with all the time. A lot of counseling and social work, and spend a lot of time with people in that job. And he said he spent 33 years in extended intentional community, and he was used to regular social connection, dinners and meetings with gregarious associates. And he equates regular bread and wine here to like the Last Supper, apostolic meals. This is very much of a unity. And he said traditional Christian groups centered on this. And he said, you know, passing a chalice around reminds them of important past events and the present act of gathering as a community, communing. So the physical ritual is filled with mystical connection and historical connection and emotional connection. He's intrigued by the correlation between the Ionis chalices that they, you know, the spaces and the depictions, and this 8-armed cross that we've spoken about in our first 2 videos. He says there's an intriguing correlation. There's definitely an indication of regular meetings of higher ups, perhaps to contact these superior beings, these gods, in some kind of a ritual of communication. Once again, Paul draws connections between the symbology of the planet of the apes and our distant past. He says there's this militarism that's overt. And the idea of the movie and the idea of our past, it's built on the ruins of an ancient civilization that was more advanced. and secret artifacts that are hidden from the masses is a part of the movie, and forgotten language. And he says they're talking about a taboo past that was a sophisticated civilization that is now gone and it's being remembered. He says there is well-established science of an ancient and very diverse group of hominids from which we emerged in the past. Giants with long skulls and then hobbit-like ones. And he says now we forget them, or we ridicule them, or we depict them in, I guess you'd call it, fantasy stories. He points to Spain and Portugal. When they invaded the Americas, they destroyed their cultural past. They went out of their way to destroy anything having to do with their culture, the indigenous culture and religion. The British did it. The Australians are doing it right now, he says. He does mention throughout his book several cases of sacred Aboriginal sites that are being, housing developments, shopping centers built on top of them. So we should ask ourselves, did the Urartians arrive in empty territory? Probably not. Was there a prior megalithic culture that came before they did? He points to modern infrastructure that's built on on top. I couldn't read my writing. Built on top of older construction. Oh, and specifically, he talks about the Aboriginal culture sites today in Australia that are being buried under modern stuff. Luckily, he says, the archaeology of Van is being excavated and preserved, and that doesn't always happen. I mean, there's archaeology all over the world that just goes, I think more than 2/3 of Herculaneum in Italy, 2/3 or more has been not studied, not excavated, because it's underneath the city of Ercolano. People live there. Every time somebody has a flood in their basement and they dig down, they dig through the roof of some ancient Roman villa or something. I'm not making that up. It's really remarkable. He believes that there could be a second buried sanctuary on the site. And he points to a second plinth. I mean, there are indications of this. It's not his imagination. And I looked up the definition of plinth to be sure that I was understanding what he said. And for sure, he said the plinth is a foundation for something. And it's there, but there's nothing there but the plinth. Nothing left but the foundation. And it has elaborate engravings of winged creatures. I can't show you the photos, I'm sorry. But he says that these winged creatures are encased in steel. The story is that this is to protect this area, this plinth area, to protect it. But he wonders, the winged creatures are griffins, and that they were once encased in gold. So now we're on chapter 7, the handbag of the gods. If you look at this cover, this is the book we're reading. I think we can show you that. You notice that in one hand, he's got a pine cone. And in the other hand, this looks like his coach bag. His, I don't know, Kate Spade. They don't know what that is. It's been referred to as a handbag. It appears all over the place in ancient art. It may be a bucket, and Paul has an interesting theory about it. So now they're in the Arab Sunni, oh God, I know I'm just messing these names up, forest in Armenia. And he talks about this city of Yerevan. And it says it's just a beautiful city. Who knew, right? We don't know anything about other places. He said it's home of the world's earliest winery, where Noah planted the first vineyards after the flood. The earliest stories from the region, the Urartian civilization, tell of far older civilizations before they came. It did overlook Mount Ararat, the remains of the Eretrian citadel is called Arran Baird, and it was once, once home to more than 6,000 soldiers. There are 29-foot high perimeter walls. There were. It was built in 782 BC by the father of a guy called Rusa II. Now, Rusa II is the one who built Ionis, and their descendant was King Argisti I. I doubt these names are terribly familiar. I know they certainly weren't for me, and I tend to like to poke around in archaeology, history books. These names didn't jump out at me as being necessarily very familiar. A little hard to remember. I mean, they're not familiar in that regard. On this inscription that Paul is talking about, there's the story of how this all came about. And the inscription says that Rusa II built this on an empty desert, that there was nothing here before he built it. And he built it with Haldi's help. Haldi's that guy. Erebuni is a word that means conquered, and it also means Haldi. Arran Baird, which was the citadel, the fortress, means fortress of blood. So this is between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, and it predates Rome. In Genesis, this is described as the vicinity of the Garden of Eden. And it is also in Genesis as the area of Mount Ararat. And Ararat, the word, is related to Urartu, the Urartian people's name. So this story is consistent. It's the same story in Turkey and in ancient Armenia. There was a cataclysm. There was a repair of the weather, the clearing of the air, the separating of the waters, ecological recovery, an agricultural revolution, a new dawn for civilization, and all of it aided by star people. There are murals in the area which show farming, hunting, the winged dinger, that would be like this, with griffins, and it shows them specifically tending trees. So a friend of Paul Wallis has told Wallis that the symbol of the pine cone is about the increased power of the human brain, and that the handbag was about a power pack or technology. Thinking on this has changed. The pine cone itself, and there's a gigantic pine cone in the Vatican that I saw, like a human-made metallic type pine cone. The pine cone has long been a code for increased cognitive powers, because it's associated with the pineal gland that creates melatonin, regulates our circadian rhythm. That's why you want to go to bed later than you think. And it modulates your sleep and therefore modulates your state of consciousness. The Egyptians equated the pine cone with the eye of Horus, the pineal gland with the eye of Horus, the seat of higher wisdom and intelligence. Descartes believed that the pineal gland was the seat of consciousness. The liminal state between wakefulness and sleep is ruled by this, with the capacity for heightened consciousness and amenability to contact phenomena. People often have experiences as they're waking up. This state is sought by shamans. They want to maintain that weird liminal state. It's sought by Eastern Orthodox practitioners of something called Haysakism. I'm sorry. They use controlled breathing to induce that liminal state. Plato recommended the use of psychoactive tea. And all of this is associated with protocols to achieve altered states, connect with the paranormal, and contact phenomena. So none of this is new. Yogic breathing and meditating into a state and ayahuasca. All these things go back a very long time. Humans have always been attempting to contact other dimensions. Shamanic practice around the globe, all these different practices, each have their own way of achieving this and getting into the pineal gland's altered state of consciousness. And it has I guess what I was trying to say here is that it has existed for a very long time. Paul mentions that Christians also use the pine cone symbol. Well, it's at the Vatican. In the courtyard, right across from the Temple of Isis, next to the Pantheon. And Isis was joined with Hathor in the Egyptian Pantheon, the Egyptian religious belief. She had the power of agriculture and medicine and gave it to humanity. The pine cone, or the pineal gland, is associated with higher wisdom and the advanced beings who gave wisdom to humanity. It's also, this is really interesting, it's also at the top of the papal staff, that stick the Pope carries. It's at the top of it. Global ancient art depicts advanced beings with pine cones all the time. Very interesting. So you could say that these beings are associated with some sort of cognitive upgrade. Make that leap. Paul saw a thread of ascension teaching in Eastern Orthodox religion with their esoteric breathing exercises that create altered states. And the goal is a more transformative connection with the cosmos. So, interestingly enough, today's ascension teachings really do connect back. Platonism, Greco-Egyptian Hermeticism are all included. Those ancient mystery schools or philosophies are included in what is taught today as ascension achieving. And all of this was far before Imperial Roman Christianity. So Gnosticism, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, these were people or belief systems that talked about all of this. Plato had a really big influence. Paul made friends in the 90s with a guy called Dimitri, and he's been his partner in the exploration of paleocontact. Just remarked, because he makes reference to him in the book, the Vatican understood the pine cone is associated with higher consciousness, but this hasn't filtered down to ordinary, everyday Christian followers. We're really out of contact with a lot of what we see and do as the practitioners of Western religions. We've kind of lost that connection. He said most Roman Catholics don't know a thing about cognitive upgrades. Ain't that the truth? For ordinary people, the message is trust the Lord, don't trust yourself. Eve was punished for seeking higher consciousness. Therefore, every woman is cursed according to, conventional Christian belief. For one woman who was trying to develop her mind, we all suffer. So as great minds increased human knowledge and intelligence, the church killed them off. And this included burning witches. These were women with higher cognitive powers, women who knew about herbal medications and healing. And he says, this is, our history is one gigantic grave warning against using the power of the mind or accessing the power of the mind. People were made to demonize their own minds. It was considered demonic and shameful to dabble in any of this. The original sin, or the universal sinfulness, and total depravity are all associated with getting too big for your britches and trying to get too smart for your own good. Especially, he said, in Roman Catholicism, there's this huge emphasis on implicit faith. Just believe it because you've been told to believe it. They make an agreement to always believe anything the church teaches. And Paul would argue this is abusive. This is about coercive control. It's the total opposite of ascension theology. For the Vatican, elevating the mind and heightening the consciousness is very important. But outside the doors of the Vatican, not so important for common people, and they certainly aren't assisted in achieving any of this. So where did they get the appreciation, the Vatican? Where did they learn about pineal magic? Where did they find out about this stuff? He says, looking at the art, you see the pine cone and this handbag. And this is a global item that's reflected in art all around the world. And he says it looks like, just if you look at the way that this is posed, this looks like an applicator. It's a pine cone, but it looks like he's applying something, and whatever is in here, this looks like a container. So they appear together globally. And is he making an offer? What is he offering this to somebody? Is he doing something with this? Did he take it in there first? And it's all going to make sense here in a minute. In India, Paul said he found a depiction of the handbag open, and inside you could see there were brief glimpse of bottles, and one is closed and one has a wick. He says, does this imply some kind of a liquid? So in that case, is this contain a couple of bottles of liquid, and is this an applicator? It is a pine cone, but it has two purposes, as an applicator and as this symbolic thing about what they're applying, expand your consciousness. It implies the need to be applied carefully. And so the question is this religious paraphernalia? Is this part of some sort of purification ritual? Does the pine cone get used to sprinkle liquid? He says it looks like something similar from what's seen in Assyrian art. And he said something similar is done in Christian ritual. Think about this. Where have you seen something like this, where the priest is carrying something that he dips into and shares with everybody, sprinkling holy water? I always loved it when they did that. They'd walk down the corridor, the central aisle, the main aisle, and they had this thing that they'd shake all over everybody, and if you were lucky, you got a few drops of holy water. It didn't take. In his first church, Paul said, in his neighborhood, there were Ukrainian Orthodox. There was an Ukrainian Orthodox church, and it used gold pine cones and silver water bowls to spread the holy water. Yerevan's Fortress of Blood may be the key, he says, to understanding what's going on here. So we're on chapter 8. which is, do we have time? Yes, which is called Alien Spring, Erebuni and Yerevan. He said there were lots of reports in late 2024 of drones and orbs on the East Coast over military facilities in the American East Coast and Germany and the UK. They're being investigated as we speak. This stuff is being investigated by multiple agencies, but they haven't been identified. But they're telling the public, don't worry, there's no threat. They don't know what they are, but that's okay. There's no threat. The press secretary for the Pentagon said, just over-enthusiastic drone users and delivery service, nothing to see here. But there have been mass sightings with drones as big as cars. They hover for hours. Thousands fly in formation. They seem to evade capture. And Paul says, Amazon delivery? Come on. So are these military industrial black ops? Are they misdirection? Are they distraction? Are they really UFOs? Or what are they? But it's a sky full of UFOs because UFO is unidentified flying object. We don't know what these things are. Somebody might know, but they're not sharing the knowledge. What are they? Whose are they? How are they working? What are they for? Why are they? Are they good or bad? It's been asked before at Yerevan, at Haldi's temple, there's a big art depiction of a sky full of flying discs with multiple spokes. These are also seen in Bronze Age art from Scandinavia. The ancients called any light in the sky stars. So if you were like a traveling light in the sky, they would identify you as a star. So these drawings that are in ancient art appear to be stylized flying shields, like warriors' shields, but they're stylized to look like the stars. He said our ancestors discussed these, but they discussed them as though they were real objects. In Roman times, in 8th century Frankish annals, from this would be from Charlemagne's time, and they're all asking the same questions about them as we ask about them today. And he said if you looked at these flying shields sideways, suddenly they become flying saucers. So ancient UFO sightings exist in art, and depicted above these discs or shields or saucers or whatever they are is a two three-step ziggurats. Those are like those step temple pyramids. And they were used to represent travel through dimensions to the heavenly realms and from heaven to earth. They were basically doorways to the sky. And the question is this how the discs got here? Is this juxtaposition of a sky full of flying shields and ziggurats? Are we talking about climbing up to the sky? Originally, Haldi's temple was a three-stepped pyramid, just like in Mesopotamia. The Erebuni art at Haldi's temple shows what happens after the discs arrive. These beings are tending groves of trees with pine cones and a bucket in their hands. And then he asks a really interesting question, which sort of hit me the right way. Are we looking at hand pollinating? Is that what's going on here? And then he asks, well, if we are, why? Why would they be doing that? So he's now referring to inscriptions at Kavustepe and Ioannis from the kings who take credit for turning a barren area, a desert, into a fertile farmland. Is this how they did it, this process? But 500 years after his people emerged as dominant in the region, they're doing this. And it seems that these kings were giving themselves credit for something that had actually been going on much longer. It had been going on, some believe, for 9,000 years before their time. It's certainly not credible that for 9,000 years, all these areas around this place underwent an agricultural revolution, and this small little area right next door didn't have any influence, didn't receive that knowledge. Then there was a discovery in 2006 in Antrim, Ireland. And Antrim is actually kind of where I'm from, you know, well, the governmental area, I guess like a county. Well, they use the word county. I was born in Belfast, and it's in Antrim. So they made a discovery. So no jokes. They were renovating a pub. And under the pub, they found a skeleton. This skeleton, they took it to the museum, you know, and it turned out to be from 4,000 years ago. 1,000 years prior to King Argisti, who was making these claims in Urartia. The skeleton dated before him. It dated before the Celts. And the DNA in this skeleton was from Anatolia, 8,500 years ago, almost 9,000 years ago, from Anatolia. So people apparently came from ancient Armenia and ended up in Northern Ireland. So, okay. Thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, not in the recent EU exchange of people with EU passports coming to work in Ireland. No, we're talking, 6,000 to 8,500 years ago. They brought the building, they brought the knowledge of building with stone. They brought with them advanced farming, crop cultivation, animal husbandry, and all of this was taught 8,500 years ago in Ireland. And given the time and the distance that this spread across the world to Ireland, it makes no sense that it took the same amount of time to travel 600 miles to Erebuni. So apparently what he's saying is these kings were giving themselves credit for something people did in the past. So Paul ends up, on this trip that instigated this book. He ends up going to Iraq, which was 7 hours away, to an area of ancient, I can't read my handwriting. Well, we'll figure it out. Assyria, with the exact same artwork as the guy tending the trees and holding the pine cone and the bucket or purse thing that they found back in ancient Armenia. And the figure looks human, except it has wings. And are these representative? Do they symbolize that this guy flew in somehow? Not on his own power, but like in a vehicle, but did he fly in? Like the Dinger, the Anunnaki, are these sky people? And there is depicted a flying disc in the sky in this same art. He says one interesting thing is you can't really see it in this picture. Oh, maybe you can see it. Look at the bucket. Look at his wrist. He's wearing a Rolex. He has a very modern looking watch on. And they have symbols. If you get really close, you can look at them. They have the same symbols as they found in Erebuni in Turkey. So it's an obvious depiction of space intervention and technology in collaboration with the agriculture that they're helping to establish. It looks like hand pollination, very much so. If you've ever seen anyone do hand pollination, it's like what it looks like without the golden wings. So Paul asks, were the inscriptions taking credit for the later kings wishing to present themselves as successors to these much earlier beings? vice regents, so to speak, of the Dingers. How far back do these memories go? So Paul refers to Silent Spring, the book by Rachel Carson, written in 1962. And she discussed the eco disaster that was DDT. Then he talks about, and what he's doing is he's setting up a way for us to understand that these connections have existed for a very long time. Here are people doing it in our time, and it could have happened in the past. Here's a quote from Albert Schweitzer. Man has lost the capacity to foresee and forestall what will end, that the earth will end by destroying the earth. We're contributing to it, in other words. Paul describes post-apocalyptic worlds of Mad Max. Remember the original? He describes the world before ancient Sumeria, before Maya, before the Urartian. He says this is not fiction. Zoroastrianism from about 2000 BC had a godlike Ahura Mazda who warns of impending terrible winter coming, who creates underground refuges for people with flora and fauna to be rescued underground, so that they can replenish the ecosystem after this terrible winter. Some academics say, well, this is just a retelling, an adaptation of the flood story, or it's the same event, but it's a regional experience. Some people had like nuclear winter. They had a winter. I'm not saying that there was nuclear, but like that, very, very cold weather change, while some had high waters. But really, what they've learned is that even the story of Noah is a fusion of earlier narrative. Genesis begins with the earth covered in water. I think I mentioned that the Elohim cleared off the land in order to get going again. Sumerian Enigma, God, these words are so hard, is actually the same story as in the Philippines, in the Ottawa, the Iroquois, in China. Many global stories all tell the same story. Human progress was stopped by an environmental catastrophe and then restarted with help from superior beings. We know for sure of 3 events that happened. There's the Younger Dryas, which was like an ice age. There's the Adams event with the Lachamp excursion. And there's the eruption of Mount Toba in Sumatra 70,000 years ago, which was 2,800 times bigger than the eruption of Mount St. Helens. And it brought the world population down to between 40 and 1,000 breeding pairs. I would think that's almost an impossibility to bring the population. That's extinction level. So it makes sense that ancient art would depict the efforts to revive the world because we have proof that this happened. All cultures speak of intercessor space beings who helped. And maybe the Fertile Crescent was once barren. Maybe it was changed with the construction of irrigation canals, with crop cultivation, animal husbandry 10,000 years ago, all taught to us by the sky people. Ancient civil engineering, civics, math, sciences, they are all credited to the tutelage of beings in all global stories, beings from the sky. They changed wild grass to cultivatable wheat, which requires genetic modification. That just doesn't happen over time. They did it with one adjustment. It's necessary to support, that change to wheat was necessary to support a growing population. Paul points to the difficulty William Farrar in Australia took more than 20 years to develop what was called Federation wheat, which could grow in Australia from cultivatable European wheat. Even with modern knowledge, modern science available to him in the 19th century, it took him 20 years to develop it with knowledge. Yet 10,000 years ago, primitive human beings did this in, it's 11. I'm sorry, I said one time. They did it in 11 tries. And at the same time, when they weren't busy that day, they invented animal husbandry, selective breeding. He says, without help, come on. Farrar did it by hand pollinating. Farrar did it the old-fashioned way. The same process occurred with vanilla. It was brought by Cortez from Mexico to Europe in the 16th century, and they could not get it to pollinate in Europe. It took 300 years to get it to work. And what they found out was that in Mexico, there was a special bee that could pollinate vanilla that they didn't have in Europe. European bees didn't know how to pollinate the vanilla. So they tried in greenhouses. It didn't work. So finally, when they figured this out, they were successful. When a 12-year-old slave near Madagascar figured out how to hand pollinate it. Soon they were exporting more vanilla than Mexico was. You got to leave it to us in the West to monetize everything. How are we doing here? Okay. So the art of ancient Armenia honors the teachers of these skills. So did these trees that they're shown working with, were they from elsewhere? Were they creating new crosses of trees? Had a bee or some other element in the process vanished because of the catastrophe? The word Anatolia means the sun rises again. He lists a huge number of cultures who support the narrative of species-saving skills from advanced space beings. Many say they came from the Pleiades or from Sirius or Cygnus. Paul rejects the theory that this purse bucket thing is a power source. He doesn't believe that. He says he thinks it's a container and that this is about horticulture. Our ancestors seem to think that the intervention was a positive thing. They welcomed them back. There's lots of art commemorating it. And he says we could reframe our attitude about activity in the sky today, the orbs, the discs, the drones, and everything, if we looked at it within the context of a return visitation. He says the contractors of aerospace industries may be doing the most to figure it out. He says it's too bad so many react with fight or flight, or they ridicule, denial. He says this needs inquiry. It needs exploration. It's time to grow up a little and stop being afraid of our own shadows. I mean, let's face it, they're there, so deal with it. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. That's the end of video 3. And I will be back with video number 4 very soon. I hope you're enjoying this. I find these books fascinating. And remember, stay tuned because Mr. Wallis will be with us very, very shortly. Slán go fóill. Slánte.